So let's now start talking about what is the deep web. Because your web server can say a few things, as well as saying, here's your page. It can also say, I don't know what that page is. So if I say, can we go to nottingham.ac.uk/free stuff for Macs? It goes, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. Page not found. We don't have free stuff for Macs. It can also say you're not allowed to go there. So it can say, if I want to go to nottingham.ac.uk/hr/increasemysalary.html, it will say, sorry, you can't go there. That's a bit of the web you're not allowed to see. And that's really what the deep web is. It's bits of the web that Google is not allowed to see, or can't find, or hasn't found. And so the easiest way of looking at the deep web is that it's just a huge portion of the web which Google doesn't have the password to go and see, or hasn't come across yet, or is sitting unconnected to the rest of the web somewhere. There's 4 bits of what makes the deep web, or 4 nice examples, let's say, of what makes the deep web different from the web. One is the stuff behind passwords. So any place that you go where you have to type in a password is a place that Google can't go because it doesn't have your password. So it can't look at your bank information. It can't look at your profile page on amazon.co.uk. In fact, if you make your profile on Facebook not public, you've essentially pulled your profile on Facebook down into the deep web rather than having it on the surface bit of the web. But all the normal pages, like the main page of facebook.com, is on the normal web, the surface web that Google can see. It just simply can't get there because it doesn't have the passwords that you have. There's also lots of dynamic content, so this is the second part. Content which gets generated based on what you do or where you are and things like that. So if you go onto amazon.co.uk and search for something, Google hasn't seen that set of search results because it hasn't typed in every single possible word you could ever type into Amazon search to see the products. It's found most of the products, so it's indexed all those pages because there's links to it on the front page of Amazon, but it hasn't seen all the dynamic things that you create because you typed in a word that it hadn't thought of typing in. So this is dynamic content that it can't access. And so your Facebook feed is another type of dynamic content which just is always changing. And so it's A, can't get there because it doesn't have the password, and B, last time it looked it was different to the time you just looked, so it hasn't seen it. There's also something called the robot exclusion standard, which is a nice thing. Most websites have a little file which is robots.txt on the server, and that says to Google or other things that are browsing automatically, you can look at those pages, but please don't look at those pages. And Google simply just doesn't look at them because it was asked not to. So there's large portions that the website designers say, please don't index this, but you can look at that bit.
Does that just rely on trust though?
Yes, yeah. So you could write a spider that works like Google Spider, which just ignores robots.txt, but you'd be somewhat breaking the rules by doing that.
Is that a legal thing or just?
I don't know. Is the fair answer? It could just be a politeness thing, just like most standards on the internet. And so then the 4th type of stuff that's on the deep web is just stuff that nobody's ever linked to. So it's never been found. It's Google spiders have never followed a link to find it, and therefore it's just it's there, but Google hasn't seen it. So it's not that it's hard to access. It's just so deep that nobody's found it. So my laptop has a web server on it, HTTP server, and so I can host web files on my laptop. When I connected it to the internet, it got a unique address, and so people can type in that address and then see the web pages that are on my laptop. And so technically, kind of anybody could do that. And then you just tell your friends the unique kind of code for how to get there, not the web link, because you didn't create a web link maybe. And your friends type in the 128.193.274, go look at your laptop, and then never tell anybody else about it because it's your little secret web page for you and your friends. And so that's just a part of the web that Google never came across, and it won't come across it until either you tell Google about it or someone links to it from another web page that Google's seen. And so all this is deep web stuff, which is perfectly normal stuff that Google just doesn't have access to or hasn't found. And so that's the best way of looking at the deep web, is just all the parts of the web that Google can't just walk up and see or hasn't come and visited yet. And so how big is the deep web is an interesting question. Google's index for the normal web or the surface web went past 1 trillion pages not too long ago. That was a kind of milestone it went past. So Google knows about 1 trillion pages, but latest estimates of the deep web are that it's 95%, whereas the 5% that Google has seen is those 1 trillion pages. So it's much, much bigger, 500 times bigger. And that sort of makes sense because 95% of Facebook is stuff you look at after you've logged in with your password. So There's only a small portion that Google can see, which is before you log in. And there's whole websites which you just need passwords to access, forums or academic literature, or just huge resources of content that Google doesn't go and see. And so it's very, very big. It's just not very scary and not very unusual. It's just behind a password. So this takes us then to what is the dark web, because we now know what the internet is, the physical connections. We know what the web is, which is just software for transferring information. And we know what the deep web is, which is just the bits of the web we haven't seen. So what is the dark web? So the best way to look at the dark web is that it's just the web, but built differently. So it's not surprising, really. The web was just some software that someone built, and it describes how people share information. And so you could rebuild that, but instead of saying get that page, you could have built it to say send me that page. It's just asked a different question, used a different code, speaking a slightly different language. And so there are several dark webs on the internet. They sit on the internet, they overlay the same internet like the web does. They just talk different languages, they have secret handshakes, and they encrypt things in different ways, and they store websites in different places. And you have to go somewhere else to find out where it is. And so a good example of a dark web is Tor, which is the onion web, they call it. Then you go to .onion pages rather than .com pages. It's just different languages, different codes, and the way you ask for a page is differently. So you might type into Chrome and say, I'd like to see that page about horses, which is on the dark web. And the dark web goes, what do you mean get page about horses? That's not how we do things here. So you kind of have to say, the panda has orange shoes. And then suddenly it gives you that page about horses that you wanted. It's just talking a different language. But it's essentially transferring pages of information like the web does. You just had to ask it the right way.
So does that mean that all the people who've got websites out there would have to rebuild their website as an Onion type website?
Only if you want it to be only on the Onion web. So you can be browsing the Onion web using Tor, which is the Onion browser. And that one can look perfectly well at normal web pages, so you can go to Google on it. But it also knows how to, or where to find out where the .onion physical computers are, and then it knows how to ask for it. And it's the other thing it does, though, which is interesting, is it sends you on a secret, strange, and unusual route through the internet to get there. So if you look at google.com on Tor, well, when I did this morning, it was in German because the last place that I came out on the strange secret route was in a computer somewhere in Germany. And this is sort of why they call it the Onion web, because it has many layers that you go through. So when it asks to view a web page, it wraps up that request into several layers of encryption and then sends it to the first computer, which unlocks the first layer and says, OK, thanks, now I know where to go for the second one. Goes to a computer in Australia and says, unwraps the next layer, and then it goes to a computer in Germany and unwraps the next layer, and that one then asks google.com to see it, and then it kind of gets wrapped back up again and comes all the way back to you, which is why they call it the Onion web or the Onion browser.
It sounds like a kind of huge game of pass the parcel mixed in with one of those old 1980s films where somebody's trying to trace a complicated route of a phone call or something.
I'm going to bounce this call through 9 different relay stations throughout the world and off 2 satellites.
It's designed to be more anonymous and more private in what you're doing. So it's also a bit like a secret spy who's kind of got into a building suddenly and taken off his coat and hat and he's wearing an apron and then walks into the kitchen and seems perfectly normal in there, and then as he gets out the back of the kitchen he takes off the apron and he's in overalls, and then suddenly he drops down into the sewer and he kind of goes along a bit in his overalls looking like a sewer worker, and then pops up the top, takes off his overalls, and he's in a perfect suit ready to go for a meeting somewhere to get a package, and then has to do the reverse to get back again. So it protects your anonymity by encrypting everything in lots of layers, sending you in an unusual route that you wouldn't normally expect, and then avoids being sort of seen on the normal servers in the normal way by doing that.
So yeah, so basically that spy, to use your analogy there, can interact with just the normal world, or you can talk to other spies. Is that a good way of thinking of it?
Yeah, it can do either the secret stuff that's on Tor, or it can do the normal stuff that's on the normal web. And so people often say, oh, the dark web, that's a place where bad things happen. And that's not what it's designed for. The fact that it's anonymous means that bad things can happen on it more easily, but you can do good things on it when you have more anonymity. So it's slightly safer perhaps to go and do your online banking in a public cafe if you encrypt it all first. And there is HTTPS, which is secure HTTP, and that's one way of making it more secure. But then you could also wrap it in onion layers and send it off, and so suddenly you're sort of more safe in a public place, doing something that you want to do more privately. So is it dangerous is a question of what you use your anonymity for, rather than that it's specifically designed for dangerous things. Because people are anonymous, they can do things which are less legal, perhaps. Although there's some known flaws of the onion web, and there's ways of tracking what happens if you carefully synchronize events that happen at different stages. And you can also, if you view things like Flash over the Tor browser, that breaks all the ideas of it because it's built in a different way. So when you log into Tor, it tends to say don't use Flash because that will give away your location, but if you do this normal stuff, then it'll be fine. But there are people who use it to put on pages. So there's things like the Silk Road, which people knew about, which is a place where people could sell and buy drugs because you were more anonymous. So the people could host the website more anonymously, and all the people could go and visit it anonymously. So it's illegal activity that's being facilitated by anonymity. But there's lots of positive things that could be facilitated by anonymity. So people who are in oppressive areas can browse the web more anonymously. They can communicate with people more anonymously and so on. So let's bring it all back together and talk about the difference between the deep web, the dark web, the web and so on. So the deep web was just an area which is fairly normal of the web, which is just behind passwords or just not found. The dark web is a part of the deep web, or it's a different copy of the web really, which specifically tries to hide itself. It's talking in secret code, it's wearing camouflage, and it's hiding as much as it can to be different and to be out the way away from Google. And so then that just makes it private. So the physical internet of computers is the kind of physical connections, all the computers attached together that have IP addresses. Each one of those physical computers can have a web server on it so that it can talk in software and share information on pages. And so this is the web. The deep web is just parts of it which Google can't get to easily. And then the dark web is like a copy of the web that talks in just the different ways, different languages. We need to start with the basics of the web and the internet, because most people confuse those as well as confusing the deep web and the dark web and how they're different. And we're just going to try and figure all that out today.